The glacial winds, sharp as shards of alien thought, railed against the outermost fortifications of the Svalbard global seed vault. Here, at the planet's frozen apex, beneath the permafrost's unforgiving shroud, humanity had erected a bulwark against its own inevitable folly. A global archive of life, safeguarded against pestilence, war, and the slow march of ecological desolation. But even in this bastion of biological preservation, where the mundane miracles of Earth's flora lay dormant, there existed deeper, unholier repositories. I, Dr. Aris Thorne, a botanist whose academic path had veered into the more recondite branches of xenobotanical lore, had been summoned not for the prosaic marvels of maize or wheat, but for that which lay beyond the ken of natural law. Section 0. The very name, uttered in hushed tones by the select few within the vault's hierarchy, carried an aura of interdicted knowledge. It was a whispered anathema, a segment of the facility whose existence was denied, whose purpose was cloaked in layers of bureaucratic obfuscation and existential dread. My summons had been cryptic, arriving via a secure channel that dissolved upon reading, signed by an authority so high as to be nameless. It spoke of a unique biological imperative and unprecedented opportunities for terra-scientific advancement, phrases that, to a mind steeped in the forbidden texts of speculative biology and the grim annals of cosmic horror, rang with the unmistakable resonance of a prelude to madness. My journey to Svalbard was a blur of isolation, a steady progression from the mundane squalor of terrestrial existence to the stark, sublime desolation of the Arctic. The vault itself, a monolithic intrusion of concrete and steel into the mountainside, seemed to breathe the very cold of space. Its entrance, a stark geometric scar against the primeval rock, evoked cyclopean architecture, as if not built by man, but extruded by some vast, indifferent entity. The interior was a labyrinth of reinforced corridors, each door heavier, each security checkpoint more rigorous than the last. The air grew colder with every descent, the silence deeper, a palpable pressure that seemed to squeeze the very thoughts from one's skull. I had arrived with the reputation, yes, but also with a shadow. My dissertation on the theoretical implications of non-Euclidean botanical growth had garnered both acclaim and thinly veiled suspicion. My research into the apocryphal accounts of the Arkham incident, particularly the blasted heath, that desolate scar upon the Massachusetts landscape where the very earth had withered to ash, had marked me as something of an academic pariah. Yet it was precisely this peculiar expertise that had drawn me into the orbit of Section 0. My initial briefing was conducted by a man whose face I recall only as a blur of grey, his voice a low monotone that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the vault. He spoke of extraterrestrial biological material, of unique energy signatures, and of a profound, as yet undefined, therapeutic potential. He presented these concepts with a chilling detachment, as though discussing weather patterns rather than the possible unleashment of cosmic forces. He also provided me with the files, heavily redacted documents, fragments of scientific logs interspersed with what could only be described as the ravings of the damned. They hinted at past efforts, previous researchers whose minds had either shattered or whose bodies had simply vanished. Section 0 itself was a deeper plunge into the mountain's icy heart. The final door, a colossal slab of adamantine alloy, hissed open to reveal not another sterile corridor, but a chamber vast beyond comprehension, its walls lined with intricate pulsating conduits of an unknown function. The air here was not merely cold, it was dead, an absence of all sensation, save for a faint, almost subliminal hum that seemed to vibrate directly within the bones. Within this sepulchral space stood the containment units, not the transparent aseptic boxes of a conventional laboratory, but opaque, black monoliths of some unknown, perhaps unearthly material. And within them, held in a stasis that bordered on suspended animation, were the seeds. They were not seeds as any terrestrial botanist would comprehend. They were not brown or green or black. They were not smooth or rough, round or ovate. They were, in the strictest sense of the word, indescribable. Their forms seemed to shift at the very edge of perception, their geometries hinting at non-Euclidean arrangements, like minute fragments of some impossible star cluster. They pulsed ever so faintly with an internal light that defied analysis, not bioluminescence, not phosphorescence, but an emanation of pure alien hue, a colour that had no name in any earthly tongue. It was a colour I knew with a dreadful certainty that had once seeped from the heavens, poisoning a New England farm and turning its very life into dust. These were the seeds of the blasted heath, the progeny, perhaps, of the colour out of space. My team was minimal, reduced to 2 others whose academic daring equalled their scientific rigour, though perhaps not their imaginative capacity for existential dread. There was Dr. Ilara Vance, a geneticist whose brilliance bordered on recklessness, and Marcus Finch, a bioengineer whose pragmatism was his shield against the uncanny. They approached the containment units with the same methodical awe that might greet an unknown archaeological find, oblivious, I thought, to the blasphemous implications of their contents. I, however, felt a cold tendril of something ancient and malevolent curl around my reason. The faint, nameless colour that pulsed from the seeds seemed to probe, to whisper, to promise a glory beyond human conception, or a horror beyond human endurance. We commenced the experiment within a hermetically sealed environment, a vast artificially constructed chamber designed to mimic a terrestrial ecosystem, yet adaptable to parameters unknown. The atmosphere was a delicate balance of exotic gases, the light spectrum carefully modulated. Finch, ever the engineer, had created a substrate that was not quite soil, but a complex nutrient-rich matrix infused with trace elements that baffled conventional spectroscopy. Vance, with trembling hands that belied her usual composure, introduced the first seed to this alien cradle. The germination was instantaneous, not merely rapid, but a sudden violent burst of life that defied the very laws of physics. The seed, which had been no larger than a grain of sand, seemed to unfurl rather than sprout, elongating into a tendril of impossible colour and texture. It was as if the fabric of reality itself warped around its growth. The nascent plant was not green, nor any shade derived from chlorophyll. Its hues were a swirling vortex of the nameless colour, shot through with veins of incandescent violet and a pulsating obsidian black. It writhed, not like a growing vine, but with a deliberate, almost conscious motion, stretching towards the artificial light source with an unnerving purpose. Within hours, what should have taken weeks or months had transpired. Stalks of cyclopean proportion erupted from the substrate, their surfaces slick and chitinous, like the exoskeletons of some deep-sea monstrosity. Broad, impossibly thin leaves unfurled, shimmering with an unholy iridescence, each vein a conduit for the same nameless alien light that pulsed from the seeds. The chamber filled with a sickly sweet aroma, cloying and heavy, reminiscent of decaying orchids and something far more ancient, something that had never known the touch of sun or soil. It was the scent of cosmic decay, mingled with a paradoxical, overwhelming vitality. The growth was not merely monstrous in size, it was monstrous in form. The plants eschewed symmetry, defying any botanical classification. Their branches twisted into non-Euclidean angles. Their blossoms, when they appeared, were amorphous and protoplasmic, quivering masses of living light that seemed to draw the very breath from the air. The internal hum that had plagued Section 0 intensified, becoming a pervasive thrum that seemed to penetrate the bone, resonating with an unseen, unheard frequency. Vance, usually stoic, began to complain of headaches, of visions at the periphery of her sight. Finch became withdrawn, his customary cheer replaced by a silent, watchful dread. I too felt the subtle shift in my own perception. The world beyond the chamber, the very solidity of the vault, began to feel less real, less substantial than the alien effulgence radiating from the growing horror. My notes, initially precise and clinical, devolved into philosophical conjectures, questions about the nature of life itself, about the veil that separates our reality from the unhallowed dimensions beyond. The plants were not merely growing, they were manifesting. They were carving out a niche for themselves, not just in the chamber, but in the very fabric of existence. Then came the fruits. They appeared abruptly, not as blooms that faded into seed pods, but as sudden, spherical protuberances along the main stalks, swelling with terrifying rapidity. They were indeed massive, glowing, each fruit larger than a human head, suspended by stalks that throbbed with an alien vitality. Their surfaces were flawlessly smooth, like polished obsidian, yet they pulsated with an internal, concentrated version of the nameless color, a light so intense it seemed to burn without heat, to illuminate without shadows. They were beautiful, I conceded, with a shiver of dread. Beautiful in the way a cosmic cataclysm might be beautiful, utterly sublime, utterly terrifying. Their allure was undeniable, a hypnotic beacon that promised oblivion or apotheosis. Initial tests were conducted on diseased flora and fauna. The results were immediate and absolute. A patch of blighted Arctic lichen, riddled with an aggressive fungal infection, was touched by the fruit's essence, and within moments it glowed with an impossible green, then pulsed back to its original vibrant health, every trace of disease erased. A colony of mice suffering from induced carcinoma were given a minute dose. Their tumours vanished. Their fur grew thick and lustrous, their eyes gleamed with an unnatural vitality. They were, by all terrestrial metrics, cured. Not merely treated, but reversed. The implications were staggering. Vance, momentarily forgetting her prior unease, wept with a mixture of scientific triumph and dawning wonder. Finch, always practical, began calculating the scale of production, the global impact. The shadowy organization that funded Section 0, hitherto silent, began to issue directives with newfound urgency. Clandestine medical facilities were prepared. Human trials, they declared, were imminent. Terminally ill patients, given up for dead, were brought to secure, undisclosed locations. They were offered a chance, a miraculous reprieve, a final, desperate gamble against the certainty of death. The first human subjects were cases of advanced, untreatable cancers, rare autoimmune diseases, and intractable neurodegenerative conditions. Their emaciated bodies, their pain-racked faces, spoke of lives reduced to suffering. The initial dose, a minuscule extract from the glowing fruit, was administered with protocols of almost religious solemnity. The results were beyond miraculous. Within hours, the tumours began to recede, their necrotic cells sloughing away. The chronic pain vanished. The cognitive decline reversed, the tremors ceased. Patients who had been confined to beds, whose very identities had been eroded by illness, were suddenly alert, vibrant, bursting with an energy they hadn't known in years. Their skin regained its colour, their eyes shone with a new, almost feverish light. Medical diagnostics showed perfect health, every biomarker restored, every pathology eradicated. The world, or at least the secret corner of it privy to these events, held its breath. The greatest medical discovery in human history had been made. But I knew better. I had studied the accounts of the Arkham incident, read the terrified testimonies of those who had witnessed the blasted heath. The colour did not merely destroy, it consumed, it drained, it replaced. And as I looked at the miraculously cured patients, a cold, creeping dread began to solidify in my soul. Their vibrant health felt wrong. Their eyes, though bright, held a strange, vacant depth. Their movements, though energetic, possessed an almost mechanical precision. The perfection was too absolute, too swift. It was not a restoration, it was a transmutation. The plants, too, had grown. They now filled the entire chamber, their intertwined stalks forming an organic lattice, their massive glowing fruits pulsating with an infernal light. The sickly sweet aroma was now oppressive, cloying the throat, making thought itself difficult. The hum had become a low throb, a steady rhythmic beat that resonated with the pulse of my own blood. And the colour itself, no longer confined to the seeds or the fruits, shimmered visibly in the air, a shifting, unnameable miasma that clung to every surface, painting the sterile chamber in hues unknown to human optics. It was beautiful, yes, but a terrible beauty. "The plants are beautiful," I whispered to myself, the words an unbidden prophecy, "until they start to feed on you." The insidious consumption began subtly, an almost imperceptible shift that only my trained, dread-addled eye could perceive. The patients, while still displaying perfect health according to every terrestrial metric, began to change. Their skin, once restored to a healthy glow, developed a faint, almost translucent pallor, like aged parchment. Their hair, previously lustrous, took on a brittle straw-like quality, losing its natural oils, becoming fine and prone to fracture. Their movements, initially invigorated, grew quieter, more deliberate, their voices softer, their laughter less frequent. Ilara Vance, absorbed in the statistical triumph of the cures, dismissed these observations as minor side effects, perhaps psychological reactions to their ordeal. Finch, ever the pragmatist, spoke of anomalous metabolic shifts that would resolve with time. But I saw the truth, or a fragment of it, with a clarity that threatened to shatter my reason. Their vitality, while outwardly magnificent, was now a sham, a hollow mockery. They were not living, they were being maintained. The changes accelerated with a terrifying grace. The pallor deepened, the skin taking on the texture of dry, papery tissue, stretched taut over sharpening bone. Their features, once plump with renewed health, became gaunt, almost skeletal, though their musculature remained surprisingly intact. Their eyes, once bright with borrowed life, grew strangely vacant, like polished stones, reflecting light without absorbing it. They moved with a chilling, fluid grace, but their humanity receded, replaced by a quiet, unwavering emptiness. They would sit for hours, staring into space, their perfect bodies humming with an alien energy, but their minds seemingly elsewhere, perhaps nowhere. They were like exquisite porcelain dolls, animate but hollow. Their internal spark, their quiddity, their very essence, subtly, expertly leached away. I tried to converse with them, to probe their mental state, but their responses were laconic, devoid of emotion, a mere echo of their former selves. They were perfectly healthy, perfectly functional, perfectly dead. Then came the final horrifying stage. One morning, one of the patients, a woman who had been cured of a particularly aggressive brain tumor, was found slumped in her chair. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of pain. Her perfectly preserved body, which had been so robust moments before, seemed to simply collapse. It didn't decay, it didn't putrefy, it simply crumbled. Like a delicate sculpture of dried mud, her form disintegrated into a heap of fine grey dust. It shimmered faintly, a subtle, unholy effulgence emanating from the desiccated remains, like minute motes of the nameless colour. The air in the observation chamber thickened, growing heavy with the cloying, sickly sweet scent, now tinged with something metallic, something like ozone and cosmic rot. It was a total desiccation, a complete evacuation of all organic moisture and substance, leaving behind only the most elemental inorganic residue. The human form preserved, then rendered into brittle, grey ash. It was precisely as the old accounts of the blasted heath had described. The slow draining of life, the pulverization of organic matter, the monstrous vitality of the thing that caused it. The cure was merely a prelude to a more insidious form of death, a parasitic exchange masked by a temporary burst of vitality, a ghastly feeding. Vance stared at the shimmering dust, her face a mask of dawning horror. Her statistical models, her genetic analyses, her scientific certainty, all crumbled before this stark, unholy truth. She began to babble, her words disjointed, speaking of impossible metabolisms, of energy transference beyond human comprehension. Finch, his face ashen, stood frozen, his eyes wide with a terror that surpassed any I had ever seen. He had been so certain, so pragmatic. Now his carefully constructed reality had fractured. More subjects followed. Each cured patient, in their turn, succumbed to the same slow, horrifying desiccation, their perfected bodies dissolving into shimmering dust. The process was relentless, inexorable. The vault, once a sanctuary of life, had become a charnel house, a cosmic abattoir where humanity's most desperate hopes were transformed into elegant, lifeless ash. My own notes became increasingly frantic, scrawled with a desperate urgency. I meticulously documented the process, even as my own sanity began to fray. I drew parallels to every account of the colour out of space, from the initial impact to the slow, maddening decay of the Arkham farm. The plants were not merely producing a cure, they were consuming. They were the colour's manifestation, its living tendrils upon our world, feeding on the very essence of life, leaving behind only the perfect shimmering detritus. The plants themselves in the main chamber of Section 0 had grown monstrous. They no longer merely filled the chamber, they seemed to dominate it, their tangled stalks forming a vast pulsing thicket of alien life. The unholy effulgence that emanated from their mass and their fruits was now constant, bathing the entire space in a terrifying, shifting spectrum of unnamed hues. The air was thick, heavy, cloying with the sickly sweet metallic aroma that now seemed to carry a subtle psychic resonance. A whisper of alien intelligence that pressed against the fragile confines of my mind. The roots, too, had become disturbingly active. They were no longer confined to the artificial substrate. They had begun to probe the very walls of the containment unit, their unseen tendrils seeking purchase in the adamantine alloys, in the bedrock beneath the permafrost. The cold of the vault, once absolute, was subtly warped by the plant's internal warmth, an alien heat that seemed to defy the very laws of thermodynamics. The rhythmic thrumming had intensified, a deep, pervasive vibration that resonated through the entire structure, as if the mountain itself were being slowly, inexorably awakened to an unhallowed purpose. Ilara Vance, driven mad by the spectacle, had descended into incoherent screaming, clawing at her own face before security teams, summoned from above, had sedated and removed her. I never saw her again. Marcus Finch, after witnessing the desiccation of the last patient, simply sat in a corner, staring vacantly at the shimmering dust, his mind utterly broken. He too was removed, a vacant husk whose eyes held the same terrible emptiness as the cured. I was alone with the encroaching horror. I tried to understand it, to find a scientific explanation, a terrestrial paradigm to contain this blasphemy. But it was futile. This was not merely a biological entity, it was an extension of cosmic horror, a manifestation of the colour itself, intelligent in an utterly alien way. It was feeding not merely on organic matter, but on the very spark of vitality, on the complex energy that constitutes sentient life. The cure was simply an attractant, a lure, a way to process life into a form palatable for its consumption. My own proximity to the plants began to affect me. The shimmering colour now danced at the periphery of my vision, even outside the chamber. I heard whispers, not of words, but of alien concepts, of impossible geometries, of dimensions that folded in on themselves. A subtle lethargy began to creep into my limbs, a faint greying of my own skin, an unholy premonition of my eventual doom. The metallic taste in my mouth, the cloying sweetness in the air seemed to seep into my very bones. Humanity's grand achievements, its science, its aspirations, all were rendered meaningless before this ancient, indifferent, consuming entity. The vault, once a symbol of preservation, a testament to human ingenuity, was now a tomb, a chthonic garden of cosmic dread. Its purpose inverted, it had become a conduit for cosmic corruption, a nursery for an alien blight. I write these words now, my hand trembling, my fingers stiffening, my thoughts fracturing like brittle ice. The light from the chamber spills into the observation room, a grotesque, vibrant glow that paints the walls in unnamed hues. The hum has become a roar, a pervasive vibration that shakes the very foundations of the mountain. The roots have breached the main containment. I can hear them, a soft, relentless scraping, a hungry seeking. The sickly sweet aroma is now overwhelming, stinging my eyes, filling my lungs with its poisonous perfume. My skin is parchment thin, my hair like straw. My vitality, my very essence, is being drawn away, absorbed by the radiant hunger that now pulses from Section 0. I know my fate. I am merely the last to be processed. My consciousness a final flicker before the great consumption. The plants are beautiful, yes, more beautiful than anything of this earth. But they are feeding, and the feast has only just begun. The permafrost, I realize, is no longer a barrier. The color is not contained. Its roots, or perhaps its unseen emanations, have begun to spread through the cold, indifferent rock. It has found a foothold deep within the earth's icy heart, nourished by the hubris of man, waiting. The vault is no longer a storage facility. It is a point of emergence, a gateway for an ancient, cosmic horror. My vision blurs, the nameless colors dancing mockingly before my eyes. My body feels hollow, a desiccated shell. My pen clatters to the floor, its soft sound barely audible above the alien thrumming. The grey dust begins to rise from my limbs, shimmering, catching the unholy light. I am fading, a final offering to the blighted garden, the last witness to the awful truth. The colour endures, and the earth, too, will know its final, beautiful, grey oblivion.